I was also better at rehab, believe it or not, because in rehab, as your physical therapists are working your body, a natural tendency for most people is to hold their breath and you're resisting their work. And so what I then was trying to do is breathe. They tell you like breathe through it. Like if you're working out or you're stretching, make sure you're breathing. If you're doing yoga and you're in a difficult position or pose, make sure you remember to breathe.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Thrive State Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. B, triple board certified MD and performance and longevity expert. And on today's show, we have a very ordinary story of a near-death experience. Here's somebody that actually went through his entire life thinking that he was crushing life, but very stressed on the backside. And then a near-death experience started to wake him up to the truth in life. And I had a very similar experience, and potentially you might as well. We start to dissect a little bit about how we potentially lose our authentic selves along the way. All that and more on today's podcast. You're not going to want to miss this. It's a very vulnerable conversation, both with our guest, which you see on the Rich Roll podcast, as well as my story if you haven't already known it. But if you're a first time on the show, welcome to the Thrive State Podcast. This is a place where I get to bring in people who are leaders, interesting people I find, world experts in epigenetics, longevity, relationships, on basically how to take our life to the next level, how we live in the Thrive State, how do we actually really start living in life. And for all you who have been following along and allow the show to grow, thank you so much. You're really a reason why this show continues to grow. So if you haven't done so already, please do us a favor by leaving us a 5-star review wherever you listen to your podcast. Share, comment, subscribe to the podcast. This really helps us grow as well. And as a free gift for being an engaged person on the podcast, let me give you lecture notes. Let me give you resources. Let me give you breathwork exercises for you to take your life to the next level. You can go ahead and do that at ThriveStateStarter.com. And now to today's guest. He's someone you probably saw on the Rich Roll podcast. Somebody who was just living an everyday life, thinking that he is crushing it because he was a big sales executive that led a huge team, but all the while going through some stresses underneath that he didn't know how to process. How long was this going to go for? Who knew? But life gave him a near-death experience. You're going to learn all about this near-death experience. And what we're starting to learn from people is sometimes life has to whack you with a cosmic 2x4, which is a wake-up call. For me, it was diabetes, high blood pressure, and being obese. For this person, it was a car accident. For other people, it's disease. And it's really an opportunity. Life is always, I think, happening for us, not to us. Even our obstacles, even our challenges are potentially way life is giving us the ability to become more resilient, stronger, for us to be able to wake up to the beauty of life. And so if you happen to be going through some rough moments in life, maybe just pause for a second and ask, what is this moment here to teach you about yourself? All this and more on today's podcast. And just go ahead and just take a breath right now. Take a breath in for a count of 4, hold for a count of 7, out for a count of 8, as if you were blowing through a straw. That 4-7-8 technique is something I use throughout the day, and it really allows you to just pause for a moment and not react to life, and just be very intentional about how you want to approach life. Because if we don't have that intent, we are running off a program that it was basically set when we were kids. We download programs from our parents, from our teachers, from the world, society. You know, we have traumas as children, potentially divorce, abuse, neglect, not being seen, not being heard. We might start to make up stories of our experiences, and these stories and these layers and these programming basically become a mask that we wear, the ego. And if we live life through that space, we start to get stressed. So I don't know if that's a familiar story, but if it is, or if it's not, maybe listen to our stories today, because it could potentially remind you that given the space to pause, we could really, really start choosing the life that we live. versus the life we're reacting to from our old programming. Now, this person, Michael O'Brien, is a meditation teacher. He's an executive coach. He's an endurance athlete, but everything changed after his near-death experience on a bike accident. And since then, he's used mindfulness to elevate his performance and health, and actually used it to do a bike ride across the entire country. You're going to learn all of this, as well as get free access to some really, really short and easy mindfulness techniques on his app. So stay tuned till the end. You're going to get all that access right here in today's podcast. So ladies and gentlemen, please enjoy this conversation with myself and Michael O'Brien. Michael O'Brien, welcome to the Thrive State podcast.
Well, thanks for having me. I've been looking forward to this for a few weeks now, since I first discovered your podcast, as we were just talking.
Amazing. We'll probably get into the story. Well, you know what? We'll get into the story a little bit later on, but how we found each other and how we ended up on this podcast. I have an inkling that we'll probably do more work after our conversation today, but we'll see.
All right. Sounds like a plan.
The show, and now you watch the show, you know that there's a segment of the show called the 5 to Thrive. 5 questions I pull out of a portion of my body that is not my face, and I'll deliver it to you, 1,000 points each. And here's the good news. If you win the 5 to Thrive, the next time we are in the same city, you get a healthy meal on me. So the question to you is, are you ready to play the 5 to Thrive?
I am ready to play the 5 to Thrive. Bring it on, brother.
Right, question number 1 is, what did you dream of being as a child?
Shortstop for the Toronto Blue Jays.
Oh, did you grow up in Toronto?
But hey, what American kid doesn't grow up to play America's pastime in Canada? That makes complete sense.
Got it.
I grew up in Rochester, New York. Toronto, of course, is on the other side of Lake Ontario. It is actually the closest metropolitan city to Rochester, closer to Rochester than, say, New York City. And I'm a Blue Jays fan. So there you go.
Okay, 1,000 points. Question number 2 is, what 3 emotions in childhood do you remember feeling most?
I would say happiness when I was playing, a sense of loneliness because there's an aspect of my childhood where I didn't think I was wanted.
I'd love to pierce through all of those things a little bit later. And number 3,
anger. I didn't know. I was a kid. This is so stereotypical with the last name O'Brien, but I had an Irish temper and I didn't know how to process it. So when things didn't go exactly the way I wanted them to go, I got all red in the face. So I was angry about little stupid things, but felt really big when you're like 7 years old.
No, this really important stuff, because I'm going to just see how this conversation all rolls together with some of the science that I know, around childhood traumas, how we process, when we become awakened in life, etc. So stay tuned for that. Question number 3 is, what one quote, phrase, or book entered your life and just made you see life entirely differently after that?
Well, if I can get some bonus points on the 5 to Thrive, I would say my Little League coach, this is a baseball theme. I wasn't anticipating this going into our conversation. When I was 10 years old, my Little League coach said, when the going gets tough, the tough get going, which really spoke to resilience and the ability to endure and grittiness and being tenacious. One quote that came to me in my recovery was, everything's neutral until you label it. So create some space, Michael, before you react and choose your labels, because how you label things will influence how you go forward in life. So those 2, I'm hoping these count for bonus points on the 5 to Thrive.
All right, you had negative points by too much and going off the rules, but you did get the bonus points because they were both good, which evened things out so far.
Okay.
Doing good. Question number 4 is, what's your favorite, and we're going to go deeper into this a little bit later on, but what is your best way to pause?
My best way to pause.
Your favorite way to pause?
I would say a body scan.
Well, we're going to go into all these things. And then last question is, if I were to throw you in front of 50,000 people, give a mic into your hand, and have you sing a song, what song would that be?
Enjoy the Silence by Depeche Mode.
Ooh, all right. That's the first one, both singer. We have 5,000 points. You almost
5,000 points. We are rocking. All right.
But you got it. All right.
So,
So email on me the next time we meet. Now, we know that a big pertinent part of your bio and who you are as a person is actually a near-death experience. But tell me, say, the month prior to your near-death experience, and we'll really talk about what that is in a second. Tell me the month before. Who was that version of you? If you were to name that version of you before, do you have a nickname for that version of you? And who was that person? What was he thinking? How was he feeling? How was he approaching life?
so I don't have a nickname for that person, but that person believed they were crushing it because we had just come off of our big national sales meeting. So think corporate America. I'm the head marketer for our biggest product. We had thousands of people in a conference center in Jacksonville, Florida. We did this incredible show, highly technical, and we nailed it. We crushed it. Our product was doing really well. I worked in healthcare and pharma specifically. So things were going really well. I thought I was on my game. Although behind the scenes, I was still dealing with a lot of stress that came with that job. Relatively new parent. We have two daughters at the time, 3.5 years old, 7 months old. Still not really sure how to process all those emotions, as I mentioned, when I was a kid.
Yeah.
So I was carrying around a lot of stuff. Didn't really think I was completely valued, even though we were crushing it. I didn't think I was getting the recognition I deserved. So there was a lot there, but we had come off of this amazing meeting, and I was like, all right, we're coming up to halftime in the year 2001, and thought I was doing pretty good.
What were you selling?
So the drug I was responsible for was Aricept, a drug for Alzheimer's disease.
Oh, yeah. Okay. So you were in the pharmaceutical industry.
Pharmaceutical industry. I have experience with CNS related disease states within oncology, within cancer. That was our major focus. And I spent my career, 22 years, on the commercial side of the business. So sales leadership, operations, marketing.
Sounds good. So it sounds like on the outside, from a resume standpoint, crushing it, probably doing really, really well in sales, rising the ranks of the leader of many. But it sounds like on the inside, maybe a lot of emotional storms that got packed away is what I'm sensing. What about your physical health at the time? Did you feel like you were very healthy and robust, lots of energy, or were there any symptoms of physical health issues at that time?
No symptoms of physical health, although I could feel the stress I was carrying. I've always been an athlete, although as we became new parents, my training regimen, my health suffered, right? You might not eat as well because things are chaotic at home. You have less time to exercise, work out. So I was feeling like, all right, not in peak health like I was maybe a few years earlier, but thinking about, let's get back at it. Let's get back into bike racing. And that was my thought process in June. I just had to get through this meeting and then we can begin.
Got it. Okay. So there was some insight for you to start something new because you felt like maybe life was taking you in a direction you didn't choose.
Hey, there's a lot of truth when you wake up and you look in the mirror all naked.
Yeah.
The mirror doesn't lie. And so, there were a few LBs that you add, right? You don't eat well. You might have an extra glass of wine at the time. You're not putting in a good workout. You're just not training as much. And then you wake up one day and you're like, the body doesn't look the way it normally looks. Not because we're in like a vanity metric, but it just wasn't as healthy once did when I was in more of a peak physical health.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And what do you think Michael was feeling? What were the major sort of beliefs at the time that maybe, got him to be so stressed out? What do you think was underlying so much of that?
See how hard I'm working. They don't see how much I have to do and make this magic happen. I'm not getting paid what I think I deserved. I don't have any time to work out, to be healthy. Like this thing called parenting is like much harder than I ever expected. Changing the relationship with my wife because now we have two kids at home and we have to play one-on-one defense where before we could do two-on-one, all those things. But it was basically around, am I being recognized? Am I being valued? Man, I got a whole bunch of stuff. I don't mind working hard, but I do want to be seen
Yeah.
for the contributions I've been making. And I didn't know how to talk about it and I didn't know how to process that stress.
Yeah. So do you think there was, as a child, do you recall any potential underlying beliefs of not being or not at all?
Oh, completely. So I was born in September of 67, and my parents celebrated their wedding anniversary in April of the same year. So, like when I turned 50, a few months earlier, they celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary. And if you start doing the math between April and September, it's not 9 months. And so I got to an age, I can't really remember what age that was, when I learned that, hey, babies need 9 months to bake and develop, right? I'm like, well, it wasn't 9 months between when mom and dad got married and when I was born. So mom was pregnant when they got married. I wonder if they really wanted to get married.
Oh,
Maybe I wasn't wanted, but because they're Catholic, they quote unquote did the right thing and got married.
yeah.
And they never really wanted me, but this is what the religion taught them to do. So that's what they did.
And did you ever confirm that with them, or was that something that you made it mean from a very young age?
From a very young age, I created a wonderful story about what it meant.
Thank you so much,
Uh,
Brian, for just being so vulnerable this early on in the podcast. And I find it's so important for people to see because people know my story, being a refugee from Vietnam, growing up in America, not feeling good enough, white enough, tall enough, anything enough. And, once those beliefs start to set in, our egoic mind needs to figure out some way to get the love, the safety, the acceptance that we do. And so we put on this ego. And for me, it was hustling in the hospital, trying to get the fancy car, the fancy house. And it driven me to this stressful state that actually gave me disease in the body. And I think people have different versions of that. So thank you for sharing that.
you're welcome. Yeah. So I created that story when I got a little bit older, actually much older. I tried to talk to my mom about it, but she deflected. And then really almost like 5 years ago, I tried to talk to my dad about it. And my dad wasn't, and so he's still around. He's 88. My mom passed away a few years ago through the pandemic. And my dad isn't that, hey, let's talk of feelings kind of guy. So I've brought it up to him. It's like, hey, like you and mom, what happened back then? And he changed the topic to, I think, probably the New York Yankees or something. Who knows? So but one thing I have gotten to is just an acceptance of like, I'm here, I matter, I have value, I'm worthy. And so I know they loved me and they shared their love in their way in which they shared love. It may not be the textbook version or the Hallmark card, but I know they love me. And there was a time, actually, this happened last year. I asked my dad rapid fire questions, 5 to thrive my own way. And it was over breakfast. And I said, hey, Dad, like, what are you most proud of in your life? And he sort of tilted his head and he's like, well, you. And was probably one of the most tender moments that we've had together. And
Yeah.
I was like, okay, that's good. All right, we're good.
Well, beautiful. I can't wait to dive in a little bit more, and get a little bit deeper. I just had a moment. I was with a spiritual coach just a couple days ago, and we were talking about this concept of self-love. And, you mentioned not being loved the way we see in movies or in Hallmark cards. Well, I mean, certainly our parents just know how to love as they were shown how to love. But if we start to recognize that that's actually given this beautiful gift of life. That's inherently who we are. And there was a moment where we were talking about it, that this like real crazy wave just hit my heart. I'm like, oh, wow, I think I felt it for the first time. And we block ourselves from doing so. I think, we forget the fact that we are loved, and then we forget the fact that we forgot. But let's talk about the now, and because I think it probably facilitated maybe deeper questionings after this accident. Tell us, okay, you're going through life, you're now very stressed out, although killing it on the outside with air quotes, and you're like, I'd like to turn some things around. I'm going to pick up biking. What happens on that, the cycling accident?
Yeah, so I'm an avid cyclist really my whole life. And so I had a period of time where I was not training, but we had a local race coming up at the end of July. And as I mentioned earlier, the month before, I was like, let's get back into health. Let's get back into fitness. So I put on the calendar to do this race. So I brought my bike out to this corporate meeting that was in New Mexico, north of Albuquerque, south of Santa Fe. And I thought, okay, cool. I'm going to ride my bike in New Mexico, one of the 50 states that I haven't ridden my bike. Came around the bend. I had this beautiful loop on the hotel property, was out in the middle of nowhere in New Mexico. And a Ford Explorer crossed the center line of the road, traveling about 40 miles an hour, and hit me head on. I had like no time to react. I remember going into his grill, into the windshield. The screech of his brakes are still with me. And then I made a thud as I came to the asphalt below. And next thing I know, I'm surrounded by medical professionals, emergency response technicians, police, fire, ambulance, you name it. They called the medevac in to bring me to the trauma center in Albuquerque. And when I regained consciousness, one of my first thoughts was, oh my God, I'm going to be late for the meeting. What are my coworkers going to say about me? And then I was like, oh my God, like, what's my family going to do? This is such a burden. And then I was like, well, how's my bike? That's a question only another cyclist can really fully appreciate. I was trying to cut the tension of the moment with some humor because I knew like we are not in shape. Like I was in so much pain, and you could pick up on the energy of the healthcare professionals there, the emergency support team. They like you could see it on our faces, but you could also just feel it in the energy. Like they didn't think, I later learned this, they didn't think I was going to make it. And they didn't know the extent of my injuries, but I broke a whole bunch of everything. But what also happened that made it a life and death situation is that when the left femur shattered, when it went into the Ford Explorer, my femoral artery got lacerated. So I was losing a ton of blood. Took me to Albuquerque. First surgery took about 13 hours, needed about 34 units of different type of blood product, some plasma, some full blood. And next thing, I didn't know this because I was all medicated. I went to the ICU. They had saved my life, stabilized my life, and they were going to see like how everything would work once I got through the ICU, and spent about 4 days there. And I came out of the ICU, and they told me about the extent of my injuries and their prognosis, and it was pretty bleak. And I got pretty depressed, pretty angry. I wanted to get back at the driver because he was driving with a revoked license. So in so many ways that should not have happened, but it did.
Right.
And maybe, through one lens, maybe it happened by design. So we can talk about that in another podcast.
It always is. And we'll get
So
there.
that's what happened. Yeah.
Quick question though. Let's talk about the extent of the injuries, because we got shattered femur, we've got ruptured femoral artery. What else are we talking?
Right femur, also broken in a couple places, right tibia, peroneal nerve damage. So
How was your spine?
spine was okay, but it had
So everything was below pelvis injuries.
well, actually, so no, like I broke my right shoulder because like when I came into the Explorer, I hit, so I was trying to turn right into the shoulder into the ditch. So my left leg took the brunt of the impact. That flipped me up in the air. And so my right side of the body flew into his windshield. Mm-hmm. So I broke my right shoulder, and then my whole right side of the face was covered in glass and major bruising, like all through my head and on my forehead, cracked my helmet open. So there was a lot going on. Of course, I had a lot of contusions, bruises, cuts, scrapes, nicks, a paper cut, you name it. Like there was a lot on. So they had to create left leg because of like so much swelling. So I had those open fasciotomies for about 2.5 weeks. So that's it. So a lot of nerve damage all the way through my left side, but my spine, in terms of like spinal injuries, was okay.
I hope you're enjoying the podcast so far. If you are, I just wanted to let you know, join our community. There's so many free resources and a great community of people that desire health, happiness, human potential, to have more in their life, more health, more energy. And when you have those two things together, you could create more happiness, more abundance, whether it be financial, romantic, all these things in your life. And if you're just starting out, you don't know where to go, just sign up for thrivestatestarter.com, because in there you're going to get a bundle of information that includes a longevity ebook, a longevity and performance resource guide, lecture notes that come from my keynotes at Google, at Fortune 500 companies, all the insights in that keynote in lecture slide form given to you. And then finally, breathwork. I share 3 powerful breathwork exercises to access calm, which really gives you clarity and peace during the day, to access energy if you need to wake up and really motivate yourself, and finally a breathwork routine that you could do every single morning so that you could be very intentional with how you create that day. You could find all this stuff delivered free to your inbox at thrivestatestarter.com. And our community is growing. If you want to be a part of a community of people that desire the Thrive State, that are really in Thrive State themselves, and help other people along with that, you could be a part of the community. You can get group coaching from me. We do breathwork sessions, meditation sessions, and you also get to drop in and participate in podcasts in the future. You could find more about the community at mythrivestate.com. That's mythrivestate.com. So check out those resources. You're not going to be disappointed, and please enjoy the remainder of this podcast. Got it. And so you're basically in the hospital, slowly recovering from all these processes. And one of the first emotions were, anger and rage. How did it develop? How did basically your psyche and things evolve from that space?
So at first I tried to, much like before the accident, try to put on a good front. Like, okay, I'm alive. We got this. Going to be optimistic because I wanted to be the strong one for everyone else, right? But deep down inside, especially when the hospital got dark at night and quiet, so visiting hours were over, and all you heard was the beeping and the machines. That's when I would just I would like, why did this happen to me? So this is so not fair. I really worried about who I was going to become. I was like, I'm not going to be an athlete anymore based on what they've told me. Will I still have my same career? What kind of dad will I be? What kind of partner will I be? So I had a lot of time to just ruminate and sit in that crap. They eventually flew me back in an air ambulance to New Jersey, went to one hospital, had more surgeries, went to a third hospital, which was a rehab hospital. And then I started like coming into a better mindset. That's when I found the quote, everything's neutral until you label it. And then that's when I figured out like, hey, from my sporting days, when things got overwhelming, coach would call a timeout and say, hey, let's catch our breath. And so that's when I first caught my breath and did what is now my meditation practice. But I was like, I got to slow the game down because there's so much coming at me. And slowly but surely, like baby steps, I was measuring my success in like 1 degree of flexion each rehab session. I was like, okay, if I can work hard today, maybe I can create a better tomorrow. So we're going to get 1 more degree of flexion, or maybe a little bit more strength upper body wise. And thinking was, let's try to string a few of those days together, then be able to look back and say, okay, you're making progress.
Got it. Tell me a little bit about that meditation session. I mean, did you have a full a set of tools of different things you could pull from, or was there one thing that you drew from? And then within the meditation session, did you find yourself, what do you think happened there? Were you just trying to quiet things down? Were you trying to be intentional about healing? Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. So I had no toolbox or toolkit or game plan. Like I knew nothing. I knew enough about mindfulness to judge it. I was like, it's sort of like moonbeams and, candles or whatever. Because keep in mind, still in corporate America. It's 2001. No one's talking about mindfulness. This is before the internet as we know it.
Right.
So no one that I knew was doing this. If anything, I thought it would dull your edge. You got to be sharp after all. You got to go after it. Hustle and grind before hustle and grind became a thing. So, but I knew about box breathing.
Yeah.
So the first session I did, I got out of my bed into my wheelchair and wheeled myself to a quiet place in the hospital, which is difficult to do, as you know. And in the morning, I just did a box breathing practice for about 5 minutes, really as a way to slow things down because so much was coming at me. Everybody and their brother had a perspective as to what I should be doing. And I just wanted to get home because it's hard to heal in a hospital, at least my perspective, because you can't get a lot of rest.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to get back to familiar sounds and smells and my own bed and all that jazz. And so I did the box breathing. I was like, okay, a moment of like, okay, how do you want to approach the day? I set my intention for that. And that gave me some guideposts on how I wanted to show up. And so I did it the next morning. And then I was like, well, if I can do it in the morning, maybe I can do it during the day. Because I had 2 rehab sessions every day, physical therapy and occupational therapy. So I just started doing it more and more frequently. And it was like, okay, I'm feeling more at ease and more focused about how I want to approach my recovery. Left the hospital, did outpatient rehab, but then started to go back to work and I brought it into work. And that helped slow the work game down because work, as you know, as people listening know, it's at miles an hour. Everyone's on their hamster wheel. It's a big reaction fest. And I was like, okay, this helped me slow things down in the hospital. It might help me slow down in this meeting so I can be more thoughtful. And that's exactly what it did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's beautiful. Sometimes people can go through. Did you find it at a point where you just felt like you had nothing to do and you had one tool and you say, I might as well try it now? Was it at a point where you always knew that there was something in the back pocket and you just wanted to try anything? Because people actually go through these like 10 days Vipassana retreats where it's completely silent. And what they'll notice is their brain just keeps shattering and they'll get to a point in time where they're sick of their brain going off that they're like, oh, that's not me. And that's kind of funny. How did that happen for you?
So for me, I think deep down inside, I knew about the power of breath from athletics.
Yeah.
Because, when you say you get hurt when you're playing your sport, what do people tell you to do? Stay down, just try to breathe, which is exactly what the EMTs told me to do. Just, hey, we got you, just try to breathe.
Yeah.
So I knew enough about the breath in terms of that, like just try to breathe.
Right.
And so in that moment where I had like, okay, like, how do I get out of this? How do I get out of this hospital? Like, how do I get back home? God, it's just going 1,000 miles an hour. Something, hit me, an intuitive hit. Like, just try to breathe.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Oh, okay. I'll do that tomorrow. Happened in the afternoon. And I was like, I'll do it tomorrow morning. So I didn't do it right away. I was like, okay, I'll flip the calendar page and we'll begin anew tomorrow. And that's how it happened.
Yeah. Well, that's beautiful. What started to change? I mean, one, it seems like the breath really allowed you to be very intentional and more responding, creating the day that you like to have in terms of your recovery. And it's sounded like day by day, you started to make some incremental improvements in your physical body. What did you start noticing in terms of how your outlook, your mindset started to change from this point forward?
So I think the first thing, and you just referenced it, was focus.
Yeah.
I was more focused in terms of how I was approaching my day. So let's call that intention setting.
Yeah.
I was also better at rehab, believe it or not, because in rehab, as your physical therapists are working your body, a natural tendency for most people is to hold their breath and you're resisting their work. And so what I then was trying to do is breathe. They tell you like breathe through it. Like if you're working out or you're stretching, make sure you're breathing. If you're doing yoga and you're in a difficult position or pose, make sure you remember to breathe. And I was like, all right, make sure you breathe. So I was working on breathing through the stretches because some of the stretches were incredibly painful as they're trying to break up scar tissue and all that. And so that was helpful. It was helping with stress, but what I found was before big moments, when I could really feel the stress in my body, now going into work, like before a big meeting or during a meeting, I would remind myself, okay, hey, just take a breath.
Yeah.
And so it was all these like little micro practices, which I'm a big fan of, because a lot of busy people don't have time to do a 10-day retreat.
Yeah.
I've been on many 10-day retreats or 5-day retreats, but that's the equivalent of doing an ultra trail run of 50 miles or 100, right? Where most people aren't even doing a 5K. So I'm a big believer in just doing short practices because it's right there with you and you can do it almost everywhere and at any time.
I love that. I talk about micro intentions as well
Oh
because
yeah, yeah.
we don't have those, then it's possible that whatever default program is going through your mind is just goes through that routine and all you're doing is reacting during the day rather than really choosing how you're showing up in it in any minute. So it sounds like, you've got more focus, it's dealing with stress or physical. You're noticing all these positive changes as we see when people develop mindfulness techniques, meditation, breath work. Tell us about riding across America. What was the intent around that?
So on the anniversary of my accident, or at least around it, I try to do something significant as a way to celebrate life.
Yeah.
Also, it's a testament that even like our hardest day, or I call it my last bad day, we can rise above it and do something amazing. So it really is an example of like, let's celebrate life. And so riding across the country was always a goal of mine when I was a kid. Then when I had my accident, people were like, well, give up on that dream, baby. And so I was like, well, I think I might be able to do it. And then we got healthy enough to do it. And I would say like one of the big things that was beneficial that's attached to mindfulness was visualization. So there were a couple of people who came to me and said, well, what makes you think you can actually do this? Like you've never done something this long before. We took 41 days to do like 3,700 miles. And I said, well, you know what? Every time I'm riding now and training, I'm visualizing where I am. So if I'm outside, I'm visualizing I'm in Wyoming and fighting the wind. Or if I'm going up a little hill here in New Jersey, I visualize it's actually the Rockies. And so and when I was training through the winter, I would just visualize I was riding through Kansas. And the miles just went on and on and on. And so there's a power to visualization, or there's a power of like sensing what the body's doing. And so I think there's that beautiful connection. It may not work for everyone, but it definitely works for me. It works for some good athletes. I think Michael Phelps would be considered a good athlete, and he's known to do visualizations before his meets. So that really helped. And I think we can also use visualization in like almost everyday life at work or 5K, as I mentioned before, or really anything. And so a part of my practice was pulled through to prepare for the ride across America, which was amazing. It was so cool. One of those once in a lifetime experiences between my wife and me and our two dogs. And we met so many wonderful people.
So beautiful. We're always evolving. I could certainly say that I'm constantly evolving. Who's the Michael today, and how would you say, put a couple of ways he's really changed from the Michael prior to the accident? What would that be?
I'm definitely more grateful than ever before. Like I didn't know anything about having a gratitude practice before my accident. I was like, what's that? So I found that. there is I'd say a greater level of equanimity to like my life, knowing that, hey, things are going to come. They're going to be temporary, and we're going to learn how to surf the waves. So we're not going to bottle it up. And I think the biggest thing is what I like to say is that I was putting rocks in my backpack. So every emotion that was an unpleasant emotion I didn't know how to deal with, I'd pick the rock up and I would tell myself I'll deal with it later, and I would put it in my backpack and I would carry it around with me. And at first, the backpack doesn't weigh too much, but after a while, it gets pretty dang heavy. Now I just walk past the rocks. I know I don't have to pick them up. And I think that's the big difference. It's like, yeah, like things happen all the time. Sometimes they're really amazing and sometimes they stink. And I don't have to pick up every rock. I can just, all right, it's part of nature. It's part of who we are. And my backpack may be weighty, but in a better way because I'm trying to put good stuff in it, good experiences. And I think that's probably one of the biggest differences.
Beautiful. It really seems like you've got a new sense of life and really living it.
Yeah, I tell people a lot, like before the accident, I was terrified of dying.
Yeah.
I didn't want to go to a funeral. I didn't want to talk about death, like, which is common. Like, not too many people in the West really want to talk about the inevitable. Today, I'm probably more afraid of not living fully than dying.
Oh, so good. You know what? I was just hiking with my dog this morning and I did a video, and there's, somebody on the longevity space. I don't know if you heard of him. His name is Brian Johnson, and their whole tagline is "Don't die." And they're doing all the scientific stuff. And I think the science is fine, whatever. But I don't really like the tagline "Don't die" because it was really coming from a place of fear consciousness.
Sure.
And that actually drives the stress hormone. And I talk about it in my book, but that basically drives inflammation, decreases your immune system. It puts you prone to chronic symptoms, chronic disease. And so if you're chasing life so much for fear of dying, you're also driving the stress response in your body. Whereas when what you said, not focusing on dying, but focusing on living, focusing on truly loving yourself. And this goes back to what we were talking about earlier. I growing up, I know my parents love me and I know they love me now, but I never really felt this unconditional love from parents, teachers, or anything like that. I don't think I've ever felt it. And potentially I blocked it or even forgot that that was it. And I am starting to open that up, but I'm really starting to believe this is when my daughter was born, she was a tube wrapped around her neck, and I wasn't sure if she was going to have any brain damage. And I remember holding her for the first time in my arms, thinking that maybe she did have brain damage, but I just said, wow, I mean, health complication or not, she gets all of my love. She deserves it. That's who she is. And it was one of the very first times I started to just go, wow, everybody who's given this gift of life is love, and part of what I feel like I'm here to do in the world is to remind people of that. But I didn't get message until that day. And it was just a couple of days ago that like a little jolt of self-love just came into my heart. So
I think that's awesome. And thanks for sharing that. Again, I know you've talked about things like this in the past, and just I think part of our job as human creatures is to love. I would have never said that before my accident, but today, like, it's about love. It all comes down to love, and we are all connected. We are all one. What I do ripples into you. What you do ripples into me, and we don't know how far our ripple flows or travels, but it does. And we have some say in what kind of ripple or energy we want to put into the world.
absolutely.
I'm choosing love. And I think love can exist in sports. It can exist in corporate life, and it's needed in our communities.
No, this is who we are designed to be. The more I start to, I give corporate keynotes and I compare how the human body is an ecosystem and a network, much like an organization. And actually, if you look at the organization of the human body, how it's divided up into cells and how those cells are these networks and an ecosystem itself. And then you look at each organelle, it's an ecosystem. So basically everything that exists on the planet works as these like interconnected ecosystems. And if we look at ourselves, I believe human beings, we are each cells in the body, the consciousness that is humanity. And the more we don't know that we are actually a part of something much, much bigger, it drives the stress response in our body and we start to fight each other. But like you were saying, you know, I downloaded this message yesterday also. I was thinking of the word love, but the O, there's also an I. So the secret to longevity is really love. But it's really, once you have that self-love within yourself, you're not going to be angry at someone else. You're not going to stress yourself out doing, things that you think you need to be doing in life. Then you finally live. So that's what that I, live in love. That's beautiful. Awesome. And what you do is you teach people how to create space. That, Viktor Frankl has this beautiful quote, between stimulus and response, there's a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. And in our response lies our growth and freedom. And so I know you have something very special to share with the audience. So before I ask my very last question, you've got a very small pause. Tell us a little bit about that and tell us where people can find you and your work.
Yeah, sure thing. It's great. What a great conversation. We've spoken all day long, but I know it's a podcast and it eventually has to wrap up. So my meditation practice is called Pause, Breathe, Reflect. So I would call my sessions, when I started them way back in the hospital, just little pauses, ability to catch your breath. And the moment of reflection is key because that's about gratitude, setting your intentions. And they're micro practices, shorter practices, even though I'm formally trained on a 45-minute a day practice. But I know for most people, that's not realistic. So what I'm trying to do is invite people maybe on the sidelines to come into a way of living mindfully, just like 1 minute, 2 minutes at a time. And so for all your listeners, I'm offering the app for free. So you can bypass the app store. You can just, in Google Play, you can just download it through the link that we'll put in the show notes, and they'll have a couple months free to try it out and maybe join one of our live practices. And I'll hold their hand along the way to say, hey, you know what? You can do this. You can find your breath. You can create more space. And true to Viktor Frankl's quote, have more growth and freedom. And so we'll put that link right there in the show notes. And if people have questions, they can reach out to me. Best place is michaelobrienshift.com. Then you can also find me on LinkedIn and also Instagram.
Beautiful. I know you've been through a lot in life, and I'm not going to let you use breathe or pause as your answer. But outside of that, what has been your best medicine?
Nature. Getting, I don't even say getting into nature because we are nature. So what are we getting into? But we come from nature. We are nature. Being nature just feels good. That's why I like to get outside to ride my bike, go for a hike, and just breathe in the smells and feel the feels, hear the sounds, take it in. So nature is my best medicine.
Yeah, I did it this morning. Back from a keynote in Orlando. We did 2 over there, and normally I would just be wanting to dive in and do work, but something told me, you know what, nature this morning. So yeah. Brother, it was such a great conversation. Thank you for going so vulnerable with us today. I was glad I didn't go with any script because I somehow felt that there was going to be a beautiful conversation, and one day I'll go Joe style and we get 3-hour podcast. But
we'll get ready for that. You'll have to thrive
500.
Yeah. You'll ask many more questions, brother. So, but it was awesome being on. Thanks for having me. And I really just love what you're putting into the world. The world definitely needs your energy. So keep doing it.
Thanks much, brother. Love you. Bye-bye. I hope you enjoyed that episode of the Thrive State podcast. And if you're finding that this content is really helping you and your family members, please consider supporting our mission and our cause of elevating health, happiness, and human potential for people all over the world. You can do so by making sure that you subscribe to this podcast, sharing it with your friends and family members, and leaving us a 5-star review wherever podcasts are heard. All these things are going to really help elevate the show and to give us the resources to continue to bring more content just like this to yourself as well as the people that you love. If you haven't already, you might want to consider joining our community. We actually have a community where people get to engage with me in group sessions where we do breathwork, meditation, where we do challenges together, really to be able to get us access to health, happiness, human potential so that we could have longevity and performance in our life as well. You can check out our community at mythrivestate.com. That's mythrivestate.com. And if you haven't already, pick up a copy of my book, Thrive State. It really gives you all the tools, the pillars that you need to create a blueprint to control the energetics of your life. Who are you? How you show up in the world? The choices that you consistently make create an energy in your body, and you can control this. And when you can control that, you also control the messages you give to your DNA that gives you access, again, to optimal health, longevity, and peak performance. And let me also just share a free gift to you. If you haven't already, please pick up my longevity and performance bundle where I share lecture notes, ebooks, breathwork exercises, and longevity and performance resources at thrivestatestarter.com. Thank you so much for being a part of this community. Thank you for helping us grow. Remember always, my friends, that you are your best medicine.